A new piece from the Washington Post's Taylor Lorenz takes aims at Libs of TikTok, accusing the popular conservative web account of encouraging threats against employees at children's hospitals in Omaha, Pittsburgh, Washington, D.C., and Boston for providing gender-affirming care to trans teenagers.
According to Lorenz, Twitter executives are facing internal pressure from some employees to respond more aggressively to the account, with one employee insistent that it's, quote, only a matter of time before someone gets killed.
But the pressure, Twitter's facing increased pressure because vis-a-vis this article, the Washington Post is putting pressure on them. There's a little bit of like you're creating a story here by writing about it. Look, obviously, there should not be violence or threats against a children's hospital or anywhere else. I frankly don't think that people are necessarily responsible if you're for criticizing an institution. Then other people, because of your criticism, make threats or do crazy things. Like, you are not necessarily responsible for that. Is your criticism, the question should be, is the criticism fair? Is it right? Is it warranted? I would characterize some of the things Libs of TikTok has said as not fair and not warranted. But this article talks about, much of what Libs of TikTok does is just publicize videos and things that other people are doing. That's true of the teachers, who talk about who are bragging on TikTok about the kinds of subjects they're going to talk about with their kids. And the Libs of TikTok is highlighting this, and then people don't like it, but it's not hidden camera or anything. Right, now, it is a little bit different with the children's hospital, where Libs of TikTok actually did do some kind of undercover work. And look, if you listen to those phone calls, the phone call with two different employees of this hospital, you would absolutely think from listening to these, to what the operator said on the call, that the hospital does hysterectomies for kids much younger than 16. That's a literal quote. Now, the hospital said we don't. Those people were misinformed. Okay, fine. I think it's a legitimate dispute, but I don't think I think it's very unfair to say it's just like sicking harassment against the hospital for having done that.
So the issue in the original Libs of TikTok tweet was that it took a clip of someone talking about the services available at Boston Children's Hospital that did not mention hysterectomies, and quote in
the original one, yes, but this is the national. Yeah.
But then the title, the words above the tweet misrepresented it. So the first round of this conversation was about Libs of TikTok's responsibility in spreading what I think is much more credibly described as misinformation. And I think you have to start there, because that's the trickle down of all of this. The fact of there being bomb threats against a children's hospital, the fact of individuals receiving, and the Washington Post articles talks about at least one employee who has gotten a number of death threats from within a 50-mile radius of his home that has caused him a lot of concern. That is a trickle down effect of people believing, whether or not it's true, that this is something that goes on at the hospital. Now, I don't know what is true or not, but the hospital has represented that the two people that responded on those phone calls as saying that hysterectomies were available to people underage were not involved in patient care and were not accurate. And I do think that ultimately it could be a good thing if hospitals start to firm up their policy and their messaging around these sorts of things as a result of this scrutiny. However, obviously, I think people are going to have to take a really long, hard look in the mirror who are critical of gender-affirming care for people underage, if in fact they end up causing harm to real living human beings because someone goes out on a limb and kills somebody. It's just really going to undermine your argument that you're really looking out for the welfare of kids if ultimately you result in a children's hospital where people are being treated for childhood cancer and any number of things gets bombed.
What if Libs of TikTok, Chaya Raichik, what if she gets death threats? Would we say the Washington Post shouldn't write about her? Of course not. I mean, she has gotten harassment as a result of the profiling of her being done by the Washington Post. Now, I would say that profiling, I didn't love single thing about it, but she has made herself a kind of important figure, and it is fair to cover her.
Yeah, my argument wasn't that, I didn't say anything about Libs of TikTok or censorship or anything like that.
No, all I said is that
your argument, the case that people are trying to make, that they're the ones that are standing up for kids in being critical of transition-related care is they're going to have a real death knell to their argument if it turns out that kids die as a consequence. So for me, as part of a movement that says they have a vested interest in the welfare of kids, I would be concerned of somebody acting on my behalf if they actually were detrimental to my cause. That's the only point I'm trying to make.
Look, I've said I think it's different in every state, but whatever the age of generally consenting to sex, marriage, etc. is, some places it's 16 with parental consent, some places it's 18. It is crazy to me that there would be a different standard for being able to agree to surgery. So whatever the standard is, at that point, then it should be between these individuals and their families and their doctors, and it's really none of my business, and I don't care. But I think it's clearly something people are interested in. It's a legitimate thing to report on and explore. And the Washington Post some in the mainstream media kind of want to have it both ways, where if you're exposing something or talking about something or reporting on something, you're inviting, you could get it wrong and you're inviting harassment, and like that's you can't do that. But the mainstream media does that all the time. So why they're protecting the idea that they're the only ones, they should be allowed to gatekeep on what's legitimate to discuss.
I think the question of what is legitimate to discuss has a lot more to do with the underlying subject matter rather than any particular death threat. I find it to be very curious that there are so many people invested in this issue despite the relative paucity of actual trans people in the country, much less trans people who begin their transition as kids. Just because something is rare obviously doesn't mean that can be a significant harm that people should feel passionately about and care a lot about. But I am really struggling with the idea, despite however I might feel about my child and their decision making, I'm troubled by the idea that there is a broad cultural permissiveness of teenage girls getting rhinoplasties, of boob jobs that happen for minors with parents' consent, that parents can consent to their kids getting married underage, including in situations that otherwise would be a statutory rape situation. We saw that. Who was that? There was a famous couple, reality TV show star that was 16 and married a much older man. All of these things happen. Do you remember that?
I do, because he was an actor on Lost, which is one of my favorite shows. I can find him since I know the character he played on Lost. Right?
Like, I'm not saying it's right, but that sort of thing. And then people did talk about that, and that was a point of public discussion for some time. But I can point to a lot of different examples where parents consent to things that the broader public, even I, might not consent for my hypothetical child to do. But the politicization of this particular issue that has gotten to a point where people are making bomb threats against a children's hospital does strike me as
Courtney Stodden and Doug Hutchinson. She was 16 and he was 51.
Right. And she later, I believe they ended up getting divorced, and she spoke out about how much she regretted that whole situation. But ultimately, there is nowhere near the level of outrage. The idea that Courtney Stodden's parents' behavior or bad judgment in allowing her to get married is a political issue on which we should vote and make political alignments in national elections or school boards strikes me as obviously insane. So what is going on here?
Your point earlier, or just a minute ago, about the rhinoplasties and breast enhancement and all that. This is another case of, because I saw people on Twitter, people on the left or liberals making that point, and this is another case where, like, the conservative response will be, your terms are acceptable. Yes, we could absolutely ban all of that too. Like, they would be absolutely fine.
Yeah, no, I think that's fine, but the question isn't whether or not you would, and we were saying this as well about the student debt cancellation. If I say, no one objected to the PPP stuff, a lot of conservatives will say, well, I don't like it, let's not do the PPP stuff. But that's not the point. At the time, you did not express anywhere near the level of frustration with the PPP loans, with Trump's tax cuts, any of that, as you are expressing now. The same with the Hooters stuff. Okay, if you all, showing kids pictures of kids with Hooters waitresses and all of that, and comparing that to the drag races or the drag performances. If you are not expressing the level of discontent at the time, you can't retrofit and say, oh, okay, I'll allow this, I'll be mad at this other stuff too. You have to own up to the idea that this instance is provocative for you for unique reasons, and own that and try to explain and articulate the inconsistency in your own worldview.
Yeah, look, let's be honest. Some people are bothered or offended or uncomfortable with right, men dressing up as women, drag, etc., and they're just not uncomfortable with young men being around sexualized females, right? Like that is true of some people. They just don't like the other thing, and they're fine with that. We did want to play a little bit of, so Taylor Lorenz did have something to say on her own TikTok about all this. Let's watch that.
Okay, I don't know if Media TikTok exists yet, but I have something to say. So I'm a tech reporter at the Washington Post. I cover online content creators, influencers, internet stuff, and all that. And I just have this beef lately with media reporters. This is no hate to all the really great media reporters out there at the New York Times, Washington Post, elsewhere. Tons of people do great media reporting. That's not who I'm talking about. There's a certain class of media reporters that literally just sits on Twitter all day long and like looks for spicy tweets from media people and writes about it. And then they make these manufactured controversies for basically for right-wing lunatics and other media people who are the only people that read this kind of garbage. And it's just so lazy, and it's just so disappointing as well. As somebody that covers the new media, aka content creators, which have 10 times more influence than a lot of legacy media brands, I just feel like if you call yourself a media reporter, you should be reporting on that stuff. Like, let's talk about how the media actually works. Instead, these people just...
So I think there's a good point in there about the influence, the toxic and pernicious and false influence of Twitter in particular, a site that you and I and other psychotic media people are obsessed with because it's where we all hang out and have public conversations. And the habitual building of stories around what's happening on Twitter totally distorts political news coverage in this country because it's where Politico-type people live. And Taylor is right about that a lot of people in our industry we know are guilty of, I'm sure we're guilty of it sometimes, I know I've been guilty of it, of drawing a trend based on a tweet you saw that can be bad. But however, my response to her would be that, I mean, I don't see why you could similarly duplicate that exact same argument by probably just also writing about what's going on TikTok. Now she's say TikTok actually, it does in fact have a much larger audience than Twitter, but it has its own disproportionately whatever, not representative of the population kind of audience. So you could falsely draw the same thing. Probably
people often say, and I agree, that the reason there's so much focus on Twitter is because all the journalists and stuff are on Twitter. That's where we live. But I think it's a little bit more than that. It's that Twitter creates an ability for you to get a legitimate quote from a famous person that you might not actually have access to if you're not an established reporter at a legacy magazine. So one could hypothetically write an entire article saying Donald Trump said this and the Secretary of State said this and da-da-da, because people are tweeting out their own statements with a volume and specificity that has never existed before and reacting to things in real time in a way that has never happened before. So while I agree that you have to exercise some caution there because it can cause what happens on Twitter to have disproportionate effect, I don't know that it's necessarily wrong to take at face value the statements that are made by people who outside of Twitter actually do have influence. And I think that's just, it's a narrow distinction.
Well, I think that's fine. Yeah, I think that's fine. If, the people are tweeting a statement, a public official tweeting a statement, right, they said that's the same as just getting a statement from them at a press conference or getting it from email or something.
But taking random, word searching for your thesis and then aggregating a bunch of random small accounts.
The worst is something BuzzFeed is often, I think, guilty of, which is, people are really mad at, insert actor. Yeah, they're the racism that Orlando Bloom did. I don't know why I'm smearing Orlando Bloom here. Just first person came to mind. Lord of the Rings is on my mind.
Yeah, always.
But right, the outraged people are 3 people on Twitter, and in fact, more people would be annoyed that people were irritated, right? The anger there would be a larger anger if it was true that people were angry about the first thing. It'd be people reacting to that anger.
Right.
Which is what you always look at, it's trending, people are so mad at this. No, actually they're complaining that anyone would be mad at this. There's only 3 people mad at poor Orlando Bloom, who we smeared on the show. More Rising right after this.